Howdy, everybody. Sorry if you can hear my dog drinking in the background, because he sure is. Um, Welcome to this live stream. I thought this would just be a fun thing to do. So if you're not familiar with tier lists and the general idea, it's like grading for objects, where um, you look at a bunch of things and you have opinions on them, and then you put them in a ranked list. And that's what we're doing. And the things that we are looking at this time are, uh, well, I'm trying to look at the Twitch chat right now, and I'm having trouble with that. So hold tight for just a second. But the things that we're really working on now are, there we go, uh, NLP tasks. So if you're unfamiliar with an NLP task, I guess you clicked on the video to learn more. An NLP task is a uh, computational process that you are performing upon language with a specific desired output that you are doing using some type of approach. And usually the thing that people try is different approaches on the same data, and they compare how good they did on a leaderboard, and that is a large portion of NLP. And I got the particular list of tasks that we are looking at from NLPprogress.com. And setting aside the question of whether or not improving numbers on a leaderboard counts as progress or not, because I think that's a whole other discussion, I just sort of looked at this task and went through and looked at the ones that had entries from English, because I'll zoom in a little bit for y'all. Looked at the ones. Let me just go to the other side of the screen. Nope, not you, me. There we go. Whoop. Just the ones that were linked here for English, because everybody does NLP on English all the time, and that's not ideal, but that's the way it is. And I made a little tier list, and I've already found one typo, which is that this should say word sense disambiguation and not worse sense disambiguation. So I sure will find more. So we're just going to go through these, and I'm going to rank them based on how interested I am in the particular task. So if you work on these tasks, this is not a judgment of you. This is just me and my opinion, and also like an artist ranking colors based on how much they like and use them. Although I guess some like paint colors are poisonous, so maybe that's not the best uh comparison, but sort of like that. So let's get into it. Got some hot chocolate. All right, paraphrase generation. So this is the general task where you have some sort of span of text, and you want to generate a new span of text that is semantically equivalent, so something that means the same thing. Examples from English would be, I've gone to the store, and I've left for the store, right? Those are semantically equivalent, more or less. How do I feel about this? I think that it's pretty interesting. I think that there's a lot of sort of um, interesting questions about semantics and pragmatics, and like what things mean the same thing for real and what things only kind of mean the same thing, and where do you draw the line, and how do you measure how different things are. So yeah, I'd say that's pretty interesting. The reason I didn't put in it and I'd enjoy working on it is that usually this involves some degree of parsing and semantics. Not semantics. I mean, semantics, yes, but syntax. So some degree of structure and word order, and that's just not my cup of tea. We'll find out when we get there. Question answering. So this is the task of, given a question, figure out the answer, and usually it's simplified to be like a multiple choice question, so you pick the correct answer. And hmm. Honestly, I'm gonna say kind of not my cup of tea. So this is different from something like search or information retrieval, right? This is like I'm looking for a specific answer to a question, and usually um, the way the training data is set up, the question is known. And a lot of the current work is around like um, multiple choice tests for school children. um, and again, I don't think it's not useful. It's just there's a lot of usually some degree of parsing involved. Although these days most people are using the leaderboard leaders are using a lot of um, large language models. So not my cup of tea. But again, if you work on it, that's fine. Squad is probably, at least to me, it's the data set that I hear about most in this space. Oh, time to ban a spammer. Relation prediction. And let me just ban them. Okay. And I'm gonna double check which one this is because there were two that were real close, and I want to make sure that I get the right one. Recognizing a named relation between two semantic entities. Okay. So this is like X is father of Y, X is capital of Y. So that sort of relationship. Yeah, also like what city was Roman Jakobson born in? And it should be Moscow. Yeah. I think this is gonna be useful, but not my fave. I think this sort of grounded task of being able to yeah, I think the sort of grounded task is really useful and good, but a lot of the work and approaches rely on knowledge bases that are hand built. So like most of the person hours that are put into this are put into like building these custom ontologies and taxonomies, and um useful, but that's, you know, not my favorite work to do. So probably not something I would choose to work on. Oh, language modeling. All right. So, up until like I don't know. I'm trying to find like a good date to tell y'all. So I would say like 2017, 18 in there. Language modeling was a little bit of a niche task. Most of the applications were around automatic speech recognition. So language modeling is the task of usually it's presented as that it's the task of given a input string and a language, either predict what should come next, what the most probable thing is to come next, or figure out the probability of that string to begin with. And originally it was like extremely statistical, conditional probabilities between the tokens or terms in the language or whatever you're using. And then BERT came along. And language modeling sort of took over from word embeddings as sort of the most, widely discussed way of doing representations for language input. And I would say, because I did work on ASR, which included language modeling, but usually I used pre-built language models. I don't know. I think the sort of newer approaches in big neural language models have kind of limited application. That sounds so rude to say, but like I think that there's a lot more sort of like fevered imagining, not fevered, but like excited imagining about how we could use these things, but and a lot less sort of mm, principled and practical development of our understanding of where it's a good application. So I think like on that side of it, I am interested in working on it, but I'm not. So like my interest in this is sort of like very meta. I'm very interested in like working on the task of language modeling itself, but not actually doing language modeling. So I'm gonna say pretty interesting because it definitely like generates a lot of discussion, and there's definitely been a lot of work and a lot of new approaches. And I think that, having a lot of people working in the area does make it interesting, but um yeah. Lexical normalization, that's another one that I'm going to want to double check on. Do, 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 do. Mm-mm-mm. Oh, yes. Yes, 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 yes. So this is uh basically taking usually noisy user generated text and transforming it into closer to a lemmatization or a dictionary form. This I would say is my fave. This is something that I'm deeply interested in. So in sort of my own research days, I'm not doing research that much these days, but what I was really interested in was variation, um specifically the character level and what that encodes. So below the level of the word, um, below the level of the morpheme. So I did a lot of work on punctuation and capitalization and sort of the social meaning of that. And I think this is a super interesting task, and also like going the other way, like what sort of, because you can think about it. So coming from like the dictionary standard form to uh this picture, this text that has, if I have sent this text to somebody, there is meaning in the way I have chosen to write these words and not just the words themselves, right? So there's like a lot of social understanding that's encoded into it. So I think this is fascinating. I think like any sort of language variation is fascinating. Any sort of language variation that's written down, yeah, that is very much my bag. Machine translation, I'm just gonna go here. Uh, when I first got into linguistics, actually, so when I was picking my undergrad major, the reason I got into linguistics was I was like, I'm gonna help with machine translation, and everyone's gonna understand each other, and the world peace. Was sort of like my thought process there. And you know what? I think that's an admirable thought process for somebody trying to figure out, what direction they want their life's work to take. I don't think it's a problem, but um, yeah, it is very useful. I think it does have a lot of potentials for harm that have been discussed at length, but also a lot of potential for sort of goodness. And the thing that really just makes me tired on the inside is the thought of evaluating machine translation. So, blue, which is commonly used, is a corpus level measure. It is not a string level measure. And it's overused, and it's a little bit, a little bit, it's a proxy for human evaluation that's not a very good proxy, is sort of where it is on blue, and it's what most people use. And really, I think to do good machine translation, we need to have a lot more human in the loop than we do, but that's expensive, right? You gotta pay people for their labor. That's non-negotiable. You do have to pay people for their labor. So yeah, and I have let me see if I can find this blog article. I wrote a big long article about blue for towards data science a while ago. So if you're interested in sort of all my thoughts on blue, it's evaluating text output in NLP, blue at your own risk, and then just sort of like I talk a lot about blue. I got a lot of thoughts there. So I don't want to go too much over something I've already written a lot about. Missing elements. So I think this is like a close your task, right? This is like what BERT is supposed to do. But let me double check. No, I'm definitely wrong. Okay, so ellipsis, fused head, bridging anaphora, etc. Okay. Gotcha. So these are things that are, oh, this is deep in the syntax. This is deep in the syntax. So these are things that are not represented in the surface form, but there is like a place for them in the syntax and sort of reconstructing them. Okay, gotcha. Just gonna go right down there. I think syntax is interesting. I'm very glad that people work on it. I'm glad it's not me. um, Also, I have no opinion about which syntactic framework is the best one. Y'all can fight amongst yourselves about that. All right, multitask learning. So this, I'm just gonna double check because sometimes people, when they say multitask learning, they don't mean what I mean by it, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So multitask learning is I'm trying to learn to do two things at the same time. And this, I think, not my absolute fave, but I would definitely enjoy working on it. And I think it is a fantastic direction for people to work in because uh, it's more efficient in terms of like training models, assuming it works for whatever you're working on. You get, multimodal effects. And I know that often, for example, like images and text and sounds tend to get considered separately in completely separate research fields, which is fun if you're working on those things or trying to work on all those things. But like as humans, right, our experience of the world is multimodal. Even if you have, some reduced senses or you don't have use of all your senses, you usually have use of like at least proprioception, interoception, and then like at least one other sense, almost always. Um, so being able to take in, multiple things and then do multiple things with them, I think is really interesting. So yeah. And the multimodal, speaking of that, so this would be like, and again, let me double check. Yeah. So this is like text and video, speech and text, multi modes of communication. And I would say this is actually like up here in my fave, and particularly in graduate school, I was really interested in, and I'm still interested in, um, the limits of our ability as humans to encode language and how we do that, right? Like, what are the rare but attested things that we use as humans to send information in a structured linguistic way? So I was really interested in signed languages, and particularly within signed languages, the ways that the body was used to grammatically encode information and how that differed cross linguistically within signed languages. And I don't work with sign languages anymore, mainly because I wasn't working with deaf co-authors, and um, if you're working on a minority language community, you should probably work on people from that minority language community. Yeah. Just in general, it's a good idea. But I still think it's really fascinating. And it's interesting from the human perspective in terms of modeling cognition, but it's also interesting from a technical perspective. And I think there's a lot of need for it as well. And yeah, I think it's really interesting. So I would work on it. Name identity recognition. This is actually something that I work with at my work a lot with Raza. And this is identifying in a span of text which spans of text refer to names. Like, if I give you a sentence, can you circle the bits that are names and be like, this name goes to this place in the database? Um, yeah, and I think I enjoy working on it. I don't think it's quite to the level of being my personal fave, but it's very useful, it's very practical, and it's very challenging because names vary a lot. And I think it's much easier in English than it is in a lot of languages, just because we're morphologically impoverished. We don't do a lot to our words. We used to did, and then there was a bunch of creolization, and now we don't anymore. And that battle I will fight if you want to talk about the history of English. So I think it's fun. And again, there's call for particularly if there's variation in the way that people are describing these names. There's call for sort of like sublexical stuff as well, which, as I mentioned, is something I find very interesting. NLI. Oof. Um, no, I'd say it's useful, but not my fave. So this is modeling semantic relationships, usually between terms or between like clauses. So I am currently sitting down contradicts I am currently standing up because I can only have one of those phases at once. Um, or like if I have 5 rabbits, that implies that I also have 3 rabbits because you have to have 3 to have 5. So taking natural language utterances and figuring out those relationships. It's useful, I'm sure. It's one of those things I think doesn't have an immediate commercial application. But I think it is useful as a model evaluation metric in particular, and a lot of work on evaluating language models has been through the lens of natural language inference, which I think is a good proxy task for a lot of the things that we understand as humans when we use language. So, part of speech tagging. I'd actually say pretty interesting. So part of speech tagging is something like this is a noun, this is a determiner, this is a verb. Usually you do this within a specific framework that has parts of speech. Um, And I think what I find interesting here is, again, these sort of the decisions that you have to make about how you're modeling a language. So, like, um, how do you tag an emoji? Is that a word? Does it have a part of speech? Does it affect the parse? Do you expect it to affect the parse structure of a sentence? I think questions like that, and also I'm really interested in data annotation and how we give words labels. Um, so I think it's interesting. I don't know that I'd love to work on it. Again, it's a lot of those things of like a lot of hand work to train the tagger. But yeah, I think this is temporal processing, but let's double check. Temporal processing. Yeah, I was right. Document dating, temporal information extraction, so determining the time relationship between things in the in a document. Okay, so this is a combination of sort of meta level characteristics of documents, and also within documents, relationships between things vis-a-vis time. I think I'd enjoy working on it. Yeah, I think it's an interesting. I think I'd more enjoy working on the parts of these tasks that are about dating documents. The source of the stuff. So I'm using NLPprogress.com. It's just off the top of the screen here, but this one for the list. And I've made some changes to it a little bit, and then I just put them into this. And I can actually pop the link in here as well for you if you would like to make your own, which I think could be a useful exercise for you if you're interested in working in NLP, trying to figure out what tasks you think would be exciting and interesting to work on. And particularly if you're interested in going into graduate school, then looking to see what labs are working on those tasks and applying to those labs because you're like, hey, I want to do this. Yeah, so in particular, I think the part of temporal processing that appeals to me based on the descriptions here, it's not something I don't think I've ever run across before, is the document dating, because I mentioned I'm really interested in language change, language variation. I'm also very interested in language change. Those things tend to go hand in hand. Um, and yeah, I think a lot of the same techniques that would apply to language variation would also apply to change. Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, perfect. Madrid is about to start their masters. I think this is a fantastic exercise. Hot chocolate. All right. Oh, YouTube ain't working. One sec. Sorry, I've been talking only. Hmm. It says it's online. Where are you streaming to? Oh, it didn't go to my event. It went to a new one. Okay, well, that's cool. Thanks, Restream. That's not ideal. Hi, Ravi. You're asking about applying different techniques to the same domain. Oh, for the phrasing, apply the same techniques to two different domains, or apply different techniques, same technique to different domains. I don't understand what you're asking. I'm sorry. Abhishek says it's working. Okay, fantastic. The link that I shared is not working, so let me just real quickly pop that into YouTube. I just happened to scroll up and I was like, this is the actual link. I think what I did was I did not update the stream key. That's okay. Work in progress. We will figure it out together. Choop. I was wondering why no one was talking. Okay. Where were we? Text classification. And I'm gonna again just double check what they're talking about here. To make sure that we're on the same thing. Yeah. This I would love to work on. So this is, classification, your standard classification problems, multi-class, binary, whatever. But what you are classifying is text or part of text, and this is So important for data science work. Ryan says this is a lot of tasks. It's not even all of them. I cut a lot of them out. And also the list is not complete. It's basically tasks that have like reader boards. Also, it's been a while, Ryan. Good to see you. Yeah, if you're working in data science and you think you don't have to do NLP, you probably will at some point, and it'll probably be text classification. So, very, very important task. I work on it. I think it's really interesting, and I think there are so many ways to go about it and things to think about, and so much room to build your own stuff for your own needs that I think it's really interesting. All right, we're getting there. I'm actually surprised at how even these are so far. When I was going through and making these things, it seemed very syntax heavy. So I thought we'd have a lot of not my cup of teas or hot chocolate because that's what I'm drinking. This is supposed to say word. This is supposed to say word sense disambiguation. I'm gonna go up here and say that this is something that I find really, really fascinating. So word sense and disambiguation is two things have the same surface form. So like riverbank versus a bank where you put your money. How can you tell which one someone means? And I think it's very interesting again in cognition, like in human cognition from a processing level, like brain processing. And it's also just like hard, right? And a lot of the techniques are very like vector based and embedding based, and those are I don't know. It's fairly straightforward to roll your own like at some degree of complexity. So I think that's quite useful. Relationship extraction. Let me just double check what they mean by this. Because the one where you are defining a formal semantic relationship between two entities we've already done. And this is extracting semantic relationships from a text. Gotcha. Okay, so this is like hypernomy and hypernomy and other sorts of relationships like that. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so this is like a bookcase and a fridge are both pieces of furniture. A bookcase is made of wood. A bucket and mug both hold things, but buckets aren't round, I guess. I don't know what this label is for. Um, do they I think they share this or not? No, not. Fridges wouldn't be made of wood. These are both round. Curves aren't sharp. These are both found near water. And these can be both made of metal. Okay. Um okay, so it's more sort of doing things. Despite Tolstoy's finest efforts, most speakers consider war to be more closely related to vomit than it is to peace. Yeah, that makes sense. Ryan says, I feel like everyone uses the bank example for word sense disambiguation. I wonder who originally chose that as the canonical example. Yeah, it must have been, right? Because I'm trying to remember the first time I heard it. It might have been from Sharon Goldwater because I took her sort of intro NLP course at Linguistics Summer Institute. Or maybe it was in a talk about word sense and disambiguation, because usually if someone's talking about this task, they'll have a slide where they use the like riverbank example. Yeah. I don't know. I'm sure someone who actually worked on the task probably would. Um, yeah. Relationship extraction. You gotta have a lot of opinions on semantics, and I don't. Also, I dice a lot. Yeah, I think semantics is very interesting and useful. Semantics is the formal representation of meaning, but it makes me tired. I'm glad I have training in semantics, and I think it's again a useful way for evaluating language models, and models about language, not just language models, but yeah, it doesn't excite me in the same way that sort of lexical variation excites me. Uh, yeah, yeah, I don't know where it came from. It must have come from somewhere. All right. Semantic text similarity. So we already did text classification. And I think this is, let me double check what I said about it. But I think this one. Yeah, how similar two pieces of text are. This is another one that I think sort of goes in the bin with text classification, where let me put these together. Where even if you don't think you're going to have to work on NLP, if you're a data scientist, at some point you're probably going to have to do some sort of semantic similarity measure. Even if you don't think you're ever going to have to work with NLP, probably at some point you're going to have to do some sort of text classification. Like, the likelihood you can go a whole career in data science and never touch text data is low. So yeah, I think it's just a useful task. I think it's kind of interesting. I think there's a lot of vector measures that get used, which again, you can use t-SNE and show off a nice graph and people are like, oh, it's pretty. So I think that can be pretty like helpful. So yeah, I think it's cool. Semantic parsing. Oh my God. Remember when I said like semantics and syntax just make me tired? I don't know what it is about them, but I think it's like a lot of detailed relationships between things, which I find tiring to remember. It's just, it's I'm gonna pop this open. And this is just like a bunch of parsing tasks. So taking natural language and then creating a formal meaning representation. This meaning one, usually it's like some sort of logical representation. I have done a fair amount of semantic parsing by hand, again, in graduate school as part of my my coursework. Did I cry? Maybe a little bit. Nothing against the quality of instruction. It's a lot of relationships between things and it's just hard. And all the symbols look the same. All the symbols look the same. And they are rotations of each other, and having to learn and memorize which one is which was hell. Ooh. If you work on it, thank you. Thank you for your service. Semantic role labeling. Now, semantic role labeling is actually a little bit different than so semantic roles, I know semantics is in the name, but I would call this almost more of a like syntax thing, right? So it is about the relationships of objects or words or usually some sort of noun in a sentence. So things like instrument, right? So the agent did something to the patient with the instrument, and identifying those relationships between things in sentences. It is useful. It's very useful. Would I be happy to work on it? I mean, I would, but I don't think I'd be overjoyed. So I'm gonna put that under useful, but not my fave. Yeah. Sentiment analysis. So this is like looking at a text and figuring out how the person who wrote the text was feeling or trying to convey that they were feeling. And I would say that this is useful, but not my fave. I find that it tends to get overused a lot. So there's a lot of tutorials on how to do like easy sentiment analysis. There's a lot of like dictionary based techniques. I wouldn't say usually. Often people use sentiment analysis instead of some sort of semantic text similarity or text classification approach that would be more helpful for their specific question. People outside of NLP have often heard of sentiment analysis, so it's something that like I think non-practitioners know to ask for. So I think a lot of practitioners just do it because they're asked for it. I think there are very limited situations where semantic analysis is sentiment analysis is actually useful, and tells you stuff you didn't know before. Excuse me. Is hot chocolate an awful thing to do to your voice while you're talking? Yeah, still doing it. Shallow syntax. I don't think I can put this in my own words very well. An analysis of the text on the level of the syntactic structure of the text. Thanks. Okay, so this is just like drawing borders between syntactic phrases so you can break sentences apart. It's fine. Again, like I've mentioned, I uh find syntax tiring. Like it's just not very exciting to me, and I don't know what it is, but it just doesn't have that like that spark that makes me want to read more. Um Ryan says sentiment analysis IMO is just a special case of text classification that doesn't directly do anything useful. Yeah. Yeah, there are limited cases where it's helpful, but I think it has sort of like the language modeling problem where like a lot of people have heard of it now and they're like, I'm gonna use language modeling, even though there are other things that would be more helpful in their situation. And I'm gonna put useful but not my fave because I'd rather do shallow syntax than full parsing. Text simplification. This I think is pretty interesting. No. It's pretty interesting. So this is taking a text, and usually uh, converting it, changing it in such a way that it usually conveys the same sort of semantic meaning, but in a less complex way. Um, and I think it's interesting because I think there's a lot of applications for it, and also I don't know if y'all like when y'all started using computers, but way back when I started using word processor for the very first time, there was this tool in Microsoft Word where you could like highlight some text and like get the grade level, like the Fleischmann. I forget what the specific like. There's a Kincaid reading level. I don't remember what the word is, but there's like a measure of reading level based on like word rarity and some other stuff. And I remember this could be like one of those things that you make up as a memory when you were a kid, but I think I remember you could like highlight text and change it. And I remember playing around with that. It might not have been Word. Anyway, so I've got fond memories of that from my childhood. Sentiment analysis is good for customer analytics. I mean, it can be. It can be. Stance detection. And I'm gonna double check that what I think stance detection is, what they think stance detection is. I'll tell you before I scroll down so you can see if I'm right. So in argumentative text, what is the person who has produced the text stance in the argument? Extraction of the subject's reaction to a claim made by a primary actor. Yeah. So like somebody says this, somebody else says something. What is the relationship between what is the action that the second person is doing to the first one, right? And what is their like, you know what I mean? Um, I feel like it's a little niche. I mean, I say that, but actually, there's like a fairly large. I can think of a fairly large number of applications for it. So, specifically, I can think about. I don't know if y'all heard about the FCC comments recently, but um, there was a FCC open comment period. This is U.S. politics for net neutrality, and a bunch of telecom companies paid for like positive comments to be written, like, "Oh, I think that we should get away, be done with net neutrality, and internet providers can charge whatever they want for different, types of data usage." Um, and a automated stance detection there. So like given the like FCC's comment, the relationship of the like responses to the FCC stance would be, I think that would be a special case of stance detection. So I can think of uses for it. Um, uh, this example, yeah, it's a little bit of a non sequitur. I do not know. I do not know what's up with that example. Um, so I'm gonna say useful, but not my favorite. I think it's in there with sentiment analysis in that it is very a very specific task that I can think of uses for, but I probably wouldn't choose to work on. Fleisch Kincaid, yeah. I gathered Twitch chat logs and gave everyone their corresponding grade level based on that, and people got a kick out of it. Oh, that's nice. Uh, Matt Rage says it's funny. Yeah. The Python community and the NLP community are similar, and they're both very into just like dumb inside jokes in examples. And if you don't know what the inside joke is, you're just confused. Summarization, text summarization. Yeah, I think this is probably the pretty interesting thing. It's sort of similar to simplification, and there's two main ways that people do text summarization. Let me see if I can get the names right. So, abstractive is you take the text and you generate entirely new text that gives you the main points of that text. Extractive, I'm pretty sure that's the name of the two approaches. You may want to double check me on that. I'm just pulling that up out of the memory banks. Is when you take a text and you select parts of that text and you squish it together, and then that's the summarization. Um, and yeah, I think it's very useful. Um, And yeah, that's where I'm on that. I think it's pretty interesting. Um, I like templates. I don't know. You might know this about me. I think templates are actually very useful and underrated, and summarization is a really good use of sort of templatic generation. Whew. All right, automatic speech recognition. It's my fave. I've worked on it. I think it's very I use it. Of all of these things, it's probably one of the things that I use the most. Because you okay, bud? What's up, Benson? I don't know if you can hear it. My dog's barking. One sec, I'm gonna go check what's up with him. You okay, bud? He had a nightmare. He does that sometimes. He'll bark and like wake up and like stick his head up and be like, oh, okay, and then go back to sleep. He's fine. Um, he's a rescue, so presumably stuff happened that he has nightmares about. But yeah, I've worked on automatic speech recognition. I use it a lot. Abstractive is very hard. Basically, translation to a simplified language. Yeah, definitely. But I don't know. There's no but there. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard and it's interesting. Um, I think y'all know. Where was it? Worst sense disambiguation. I am dyslexic, so having a way to like reduce the amount of typing I do is very helpful. Um, it doesn't always reduce the amount of total time I spend looking at a screen and correcting things, though. So, information extraction. I'm gonna look at how they say this. Oh, so creating knowledge graphs. Yeah. Okay. Uh, yeah. So given text, can you extract like Honolulu and Barack Obama and the relationship born in between Obama and Honolulu, and of course that's a directional relationship because Honolulu wasn't born into Barack Obama. Yeah. Again, very useful. Excellent to have. I'd rather work on that than parsing. Very useful to have a structured representation of things that have been stated in a text. I almost said things that are true in the world, but those are two separate things. Particularly if you're looking at like any sort of grounding, knowledge bases are a really good way to do that. And automating any part of building knowledge bases is a big plus because I don't know if you ever tried to build an ontology, but it just takes forever. It's very labor intensive. Intent detection. I would say I work on it. I honestly think intent detection is more interesting than named entity recognition, just because named entity recognition is kind of an easier task, particularly if you have like a bunch of regexes that a bunch of people have worked on a lot and gotten a lot of feedback from. So that's my uh, preference there. But intent detection is, it's a text classification problem. I think in general, text classification is very interesting and very useful. And yeah, Yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking about intent detection and helping people to write better intents. Common sense. What did they say about common sense? I'm interested about how they talk about it. Oop. Common sense reasoning tasks are intended to require the model to go beyond pattern recognition. Instead, the model should use common sense or world knowledge to make inferences. Um, I think this might have been, besides the ones that are sort of general knowledge, like machine translation and ASR, this might have been the first NLP specific task I read about. Um, Maybe in high school. And I think actually it was not in an NLP context, it was in a robotics context. So like knowing that if you just let go of an apple, it'll fall, and like knowing that gravity works on objects and sort of having that like world understanding and world model. And it might even have been in middle school because I never got really into robotics. But uh, did my high school have a robotics team? Pretty sure they didn't. I think they did when my sibling was going through high school, but I don't think they did when I was there. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, that was a big old tangent there. I think it's interesting. I think it's useful. Would I work on it? I don't know. I think it would depend on like what I was working on specifically. So I think like social reasoning parts of common sense are really interesting and play on my background a lot, or would let me use a lot of my background. And yeah, it's very useful. And again, it's a good way of, like natural language inference, it's a good way of probing models and applications and seeing how they do stuff. Constituency parsing. So we actually have two types of parsing. We have constituency parsing and dependency parsing, and I'm just going to talk about the differences in both of them, and I'm going to say what they say, so I don't say wrong things. Constituency-based parse tree from a sentence that represents its syntactic structure according to a phrase structure grammar. So a phrase is made up of various words with various parts of speeches and their relationship to each other in some way. And a dependency grammar is the task of extracting a dependency parse to a sentence that represents its grammatical structure and defines the relationship between heads words and words that modify these heads. I do not have an opinion between dependencies and constituencies. I am not going to develop one. I think that it is good and useful, that there's lots of good uses of parsing, and that I don't intend to work on them. So that's where I am on that. If you work on parsing, again, thank you. This is not a judgment on you. This is my opinion. All right, co-reference resolution. So this should be like anaphor resolution, right? Yep. Clustering mentions and attacks that refer to the same underlying real world entities. So I, my, and she all refer to the same person here, and Obama refers to he. So yeah, this is similar to anaphor resolution and things that refer to the same thing. Again, very useful. I'd rather work on co-reference resolution than parsing. So that's where that is on that thing. Yeah, very useful, particularly if you're doing text analysis. It's good to know that tools to do this exist. I probably would not choose to build my own. Template-based NLG. So this is instead of, say, neural NLG, where you natural language generation. Sorry, I didn't say what the NLG stands for. Natural language generation. So neural language generation would be like with BERT, where you just like seed with a little bit of text, and then you get a bunch more text out. Template-based generation is has actually been in production for, I think, probably longer than I've been alive, as a way to take a structured knowledge database and some templates and generate factually correct. I mean, the way that I know that it was used that I first heard about it was in like reporting sports scores. So you have like a template that's like the blanks beat the blanks at blank last night, and you fill in the blanks with the appropriate information from some sort of structured knowledge database. Very useful. Is it the most exciting task in the world? No, but would I work on it? Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned, I like templates. I think that there's a lot of challenge in writing a good template. And yeah, I think they solve a lot of problems, and that's where I am on that. Dialogue, I would say I enjoy working on it. I think not all parts of it are equally interesting to me. And I think here mainly they mean like I'm going to say that they mean mainly dialogue policies. So, how do you decide what to do next in a conversation given the history of the conversation? But I think probably this more broadly refers to like any sort of chatbot or dialogue system. Um, yeah, it's not something I've like ever specifically sought out before Raza, but it has a lot of relations to other things that I am very interested in, and it's useful, right? People build and also other people use dialogue systems, and it can be um, a really accessible way of interacting with systems, and I think they genuinely can help the world. So I definitely enjoy working on it. Do work on it. I enjoy it. But if I were picking like from all of the research topics in NLP, probably wouldn't be top of my list, but it also wouldn't not be on my list. Domain adaptation, on the other hand, so what they say about domain adaptation for sentiment analysis. Yes. So this is taking. They only talk about sentiment analysis and also the domain of finance. Okay. So domain is generally, you can think about it like topic is usually a helpful way to think about it. So the different situations in which language is used. So there might be a domain, finance, medical, NLP, and which I also probably would have added to that list because I know that there's a lot of medical NLP leaderboards as well. I think it's very interesting. I would say that this is my fave. And again, the thing that really appeals to me about it is the variation. You may have gotten the idea that I quite like language variation, and I quite like looking at types of language use that vary in reliable ways and using that information to extract features and classify text. Yep, correct. that's that's something that I find very interesting. And domain adaptation, there's differences in word frequencies between domains, and but also like syntactic structures and abbreviations. Where do you use abbreviations? What do those abbreviations mean? So I think it's really interesting, and I also like the way that different domains talk to different communities. So really good domain adaptation requires knowing about multiple communities, which I think is quite interesting. Entity linking. Let me double check. Recognizing named entity recognitions and disambiguating named entities to a knowledge base. It is also sometimes simply known as named entity recognition and disambiguation. Okay, so it's NER plus integrating a knowledge base. I'm actually going to put that below NER because I think the addition of the knowledge base, it makes like a you may have gotten the impression that I like knowledge bases. I'm glad they exist. I think they're very useful, but they're not my favorite. And yep, if I could have like completely green field to work on whatever I wanted to, it probably wouldn't be knowledge bases. If you work on knowledge bases, again, thank you. I think they're great. And finally, error correction. And I think this goes with ASR in a couple of ways. So one way I think is just interesting. Like, how do we figure out that something's an error? What do we do with it when we decide it's an error? How do we provide suggestions? Can that process be automated? Should that process be automated? Who gets corrected? I think all those questions are super interesting. But also, like I mentioned, I'm dyslexic. And if it weren't for spelling corrections, a lot of my text would be unreadable. So I am deeply thankful for the existence of spelling corrections. And as you can see, I do need them. It would be helpful if I had them. Um, there was a presentation mode that I fully intended to use and did not. That's okay. Uh, which libraries do I use for? Depends what I'm doing. Depends what I'm doing. In NLP, my sort of yeah, I like Spacey for if your goal is to build a system, I would use Spacey. We use Spacey at Raza. If your goal is to just mess with stuff and try stuff out and see what happens, NLTK is a beast. It has, right? It's like this sort of Frankenstein entity of a bunch of different researchers adding to it over time. And much like Frankenstein, it's very beautiful and very strong and has many Frankenstein's monster. It's very beautiful and very strong and has many redeeming qualities. But it would also be difficult to wrestle sometimes. Yeah, so I also do occasionally use NLTK, although I'm not using that much like I'm not doing that much novel research on my own these days, but I'm keeping up with it. Whew. All right, we did it. I took about an hour. I honestly thought that this might take far longer because there are a lot of tasks. And I did not do all of the tasks. Some of them I combined. Some of them I was just like, I don't want to talk about that. But if you're interested in checking out the list of tasks, this is from nlpprogress.com. No space between the NLP and the progress. And they also have each of these links also leads to data sets and like shared tasks. So for different languages as well. And by different languages, I mean like a very small selection of them. And if you have any tasks that weren't in there that you would like to add, you can do that if they have papers published on them. So yeah. And there's a final tier list, and I don't know what will happen when I click save, so I'm just gonna wait to save it until after the stream. If you want to do your own, I put the link in the Twitch chat, and it's also in the YouTube. It ain't. I'll put it in the YouTube as well, and I'll edit the video so that it is in the video description as well. Yeah, and I would be interested to see. Mad Rage says, any advice for someone starting out for finding tasks that are enjoyable for you? Yeah, that's a real good question. That's a real good question. I would say find something that piques your interest at least a little bit to begin with, right? So like if you speak a lot of languages, maybe machine translation, or if you maybe you have like an educational background, maybe like question answering or summarization would be something that like builds on something you already know. I think if you're already looking into a graduate program, like something appeals to you about this field to begin with, right? So what was it that drew you into the field? What made you excited in the first place? Maybe start there. Do keep in mind that if what made you excited was like a big paper that a lot of people have read, that's probably what made a lot of your classmates excited and probably also made like your peers at other schools excited. So it may be a very crowded area. And my recommendation if you are just going into grad school would be to find something that you genuinely think is interesting that also not everyone else is working on. If everyone's working on it, you're going to have a bigger community of researchers that you're, honestly competing with for like space to workshop. And yeah, I don't know. I like working on niche topics. That's also just me. Uh, I'm not gonna say that I drove my advisor crazy in graduate school, but I did a lot of things and I had a good time, and I learned a lot, and that's what matters. So, yeah, and start reading papers. You do not have to understand everything that's going on in a paper to start to get an understanding of sort of the shape or outline of a particular task or field. So. All right. So I'm gonna call it there. Thanks so much for joining. Thanks so much for joining. I'm gonna try and fix the video title over here and make it so that it does work and doesn't not work. Yeah. And this is safe. Feel free to fill it out yourself. I would love to see y'all's sort of ranking as well. I get the feeling that mine would probably be different from the majority of people working in NLP. Yeah. Uh, yeah. Thanks for joining. Have a great evening. Uh, will I stream next Tuesday? Let's find out. Maybe. I would like to. I'd like to start streaming on my channel on every Tuesday, but we'll see how long I can keep it up because I'm careful about overextending myself. So yeah, yeah. I'm glad it was helpful, Mad Rage. Thanks for joining, and thanks for everybody who joined. And I will see you soon. Bye.